समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है, अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है, अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
So once in about 3 months, we do some storytelling on Cut the Clutter. Once in about 3 months means one episode in about 100. Now, I know that you let me indulge myself, or you might even let me do it more often. But for me to do that, and for me to keep the spirit of Cut the Clutter, we have to find a strong context. And the context should be such that even the storytelling helps us declutter something. So today is the 10th anniversary of the assassination of Rajiv Gandhi, and that gives us something to talk about the assassination, but also by way of storytelling, because this is a story that I covered from the very beginning until its crucial stages, and then I kept on following up on Tamil Sri Lankan politics for a very long time. Later interviewed serving presidents Chandrika Kumaratunge and then Mahinda Rajapakse twice, in fact, on my TV show Walk the Talk then. So I've kept track of what's been happening there, and that's why years later is a good time for us to put some pieces together. So I wrote about some of this in an occasional series I write called First Person Second Draft, and I am sharing a link to that article with you in today's description. So First Person Second Draft is a story that I covered first person at some point, and second draft when I write about it much later with the benefit of 20/20 hindsight and also fresh knowledge. So this series actually started with a bunch of articles, long articles I wrote on the Sri Lankan situation, beginning with Rajiv Gandhi assassination, and this was inspired, and I must give credit where it's due, this was inspired by Shujit Sarkar's brilliant film Madras Cafe, because when I saw the film I figured that that film was very close to the reality of what had happened with Rajiv's assassination and the LTTE, IPKF war and all the intelligence, subterfuge, spying, smoke and mirrors that went on behind the scenes. And a lot of the events that the film featured were almost like true events. In some cases, timing was changed a little bit, but that is the artistic freedom, or that is the filmmaker's license, because this was meant to be a fictional account. But what that film did was, it made me get my thoughts together, my notes, I don't have many, together, and also read up on what I had written in the past, because I had written a lot in the past, and put things together. Now, based on that, and again with further knowledge and further information that's come up since then, that is more than 7 years since that series was written, I am now trying to reconstruct what happened and the deeper politics behind it, and the motive that the LTTE might have had in killing Rajiv Gandhi, the diabolical conspiracy that went beyond LTTE, and from that we arrive at some conclusion, that will be my conclusion, on whether these 7 deserve any mercy now or not, or whether they deserve the consideration of a liberal system of jurisprudence or not. Now, within 10 days of Rajiv's assassination 30 years back, exactly 30 years back, 21st May, he got assassinated. Say about 1st of June or so, I was in Colombo, because the first issue of India Today, where I used to work, had a story which was done from here. It had Rajiv Gandhi on the cover. That story was done from here, and I had contributed to that. I will share all these stories from you, both by way of links from India Today's website, but also screenshots on our screen. So you can see the headlines, and you can see that I am not just talking from memory. So after the first story, in about 5 or 6 days, it became quite evident that the links of this conspiracy were all leading to Sri Lanka, all leading to northern Sri Lanka or the Jaffna area or the LTTE. You remember this was 1991, just the other day it seemed, that is 7 years earlier, but seemed just the other way, that another member of the Gandhi family had been assassinated, that was Indira Gandhi. She was assassinated by angry Sikh militants, angry Sikh policemen who served in her security detail. So immediately the suspicion was on maybe another group of Sikh militants when Rajiv was assassinated, but in a day or so it became clear that it wasn't that. In fact, within the same day it became clear that it wasn't the Sikh militants, it was some Tamil groups, also because this happened in Sri Perumbudur, which is not far from Chennai in Tamil Nadu. But in 4 or 5 days it was clear that this conspiracy, the roots of the conspiracy or the source of the conspiracy was in Sri Lanka. So, say around the 1st of June, I have to check old passports, maybe 1st of June or 2nd of June, within 10 days of the assassination, I lined up in Colombo to follow up on the story. And among the many people who went out to meet, one of my first ports of call, the person I called first, was a man called Lalith Athulathmudali. See his picture. Lalith Athulathmudali was one of the sharpest, brightest and most promising politicians in the subcontinent of his generation. In some ways, he was seen as sort of Sri Lanka's P. Chidambaram, or you might say P. Chidambaram was like Sri Lanka's India's Lalith Athulathmudali, because Chidambaram was 9 years younger than Athulathmudali. Both were handling internal security. Both were people who didn't speak very much, very to the point, very cut and dry. So, sometimes both faced the allegation or the charge that they were arrogant, but they kept to the point. They did not make small talk, nor did Lalith Athulathmudali. So, I reached out to Lalith Athulathmudali, and I had reasons to have known him very well, which I will come to subsequently in this episode, and he asked me to come see him. Now, I went to see him in his house. This must have been maybe 3rd June of 1991. I do remember it was the exact time I was staying at Taj Samudra in Colombo, which is a hotel on the seafront owned by the Taj Group of India, and on the same floor in a larger suite, of course, was Mr. S.K. Datta, who was a senior officer of the CBI, who had also been sent to investigate the Sri Lankan end of this conspiracy. In fact, I used to run into him going in and out of the hotel. Anyway, so I went to see Lalith. Now, Lalith, by this time, I remembered him from my earlier meetings. I had first met him in 1985. He was a very proud, vain man, vain as vain can be. Now he looked like quite a pale shadow of himself. In fact, I also wrote this, that politically, physically, personally, even in terms of his spirit and mood, he was less than a pale shadow of himself. In fact, if I said he was a pale shadow of himself by now, it would be a great understatement, because something terrible had happened to him meanwhile since I had met him the first time in 1985. In 1987, a bomb that was apparently thrown to assassinate J.R. Jayawardene, who was then the president and strongman of Sri Lanka, that bomb, it was said, missed its aim or direction and landed in Lalith Athulathmudali's lap. Everybody suspected later that this bomb was actually meant to take out Lalith Athulathmudali, because he had been the Minister for Internal Security and Defence. Both, a very powerful man, young man, very powerful. How young? I will tell you. He was a friend of Benazir Bhutto's and had been the president of Oxford Union just a year before Benazir Bhutto. So you can imagine how young he was between 1985 and 87, when he was the second most powerful man in his country's cabinet and handling all of the security. So this bomb had landed in his lap, had taken out a lot of vital parts of his body, but he survived. He survived as a medical marvel with lots of shrapnel in his body. His body had been put together by the finest of surgeons. But here he was, looked like a defeated man, and I know that he as usual offered me tea, but not like what he would have done in the past. As usual, I said that because that is the way politicians in the subcontinent would welcome you, particularly if they knew you. In the past, he would invite you for a nice meal and cognac that was his favorite drink. Now no talk of cognac, no talk of a meal. I went to see him in an afternoon, and I was also struck to see the person who brought the tea. The person who brought the tea had a white petticoat showing very prominently under maybe one or two strands of two turns of a very thin muslin red sari, and the person had a tuft of beard hair hanging from the person's chin. So obviously the person was a transgender. Now this was again a little odd for Lalith, who was always known to be a ladies' man. In fact, the first time I had met him in 1985, because we got to like each other for some reason, or he got to like me. I have no choice. I am a journalist. I have to go and deal with people. So he invited me to his farmhouse the next day, where he introduced me to his Dutch burger wife. And Dutch burger wife had a Western style light complexion. He also showed me a framed picture of himself and his wife with Gyani Zail Singh, President of India, when they had come on a visit to India, and underlined the fact that Gyani Zail Singh said to him that your wife is so fair skinned, she must be a Punjabi. So he was that kind of a person. Now here he was, and he said to me as I walked in, he said to me as I sat down, so you are here, you've come here to find out who killed Rajiv Gandhi? I will tell you, he said, exact quotes as were published. I am also sharing with you the story that was published in India Today. That is the first half June issue of 1991, 30 years back. And he then went on to say, the same guy killed Rajiv that tried to kill me, but will succeed eventually. So I said, which guy? He said, it's the LTTE, of course. I am not saying LTTE didn't kill Rajiv Gandhi. It's the LTTE, of course, but it isn't just the LTTE. This BASTA.D. I mean, since the reference will come, I will just use B instead of spelling it out or using an unprintable word, unprintable sort of slur. He said this B is also hand in glove. And this B, the B he was referring to was Premadasa, who was then the president of Sri Lanka, the most powerful dictatorial leader in Sri Lanka before Mahinda Rajapaksa came in later, almost 2 decades later. So he said, it is the LTTE, of course, but it isn't just the LTTE. This B is also hand in glove, and this B was Premadasa. So I said, Lalith, you really got shaken up by what you've suffered. You can't be saying that your country's president is involved in the assassination of my country's former prime minister. Have you gone unhinged? He said, you know, my friend, you know nothing. This B, again, B is short for you know what. This B killed Vijay Kumaratunge. Vijay Kumaratunge now was a very famous Sri Lankan actor. He was sometimes also called Sri Lanka's Amitabh Bachchan. Remember, this was also the period of Amitabh Bachchan's peak. So he said, this B got Vijay Kumaratunge killed. Vijay Kumaratunge had organized, he was leading a peace campaign to bring about, to do some peacemaking between LTTE and the Sinhala and the Sri Lanka government, which was dominated by Sinhala. So he was a man of peace. He also happened to be the husband of Chandrika Kumaratunge, who later became the president and prime minister of Sri Lanka. He had been assassinated. So he said, this B killed Vijay Kumaratunge. This B killed Ranjan Vijay Ratne. Ranjan Vijay Ratne was Lalith's successor as Minister for Internal Security and Minister for Defence. So, you know, as long as LTTE was active, the most dangerous job in the country was Minister of Defense or Minister of Internal Security. And if you were both, there was bound to be a contract on your head or a supari on your head. Mostly with a suicide bomber, you had no choice, it was going to be done. So he said, this bee killed Vijay Kumaratunge, this bee killed Ranjan Vijayaratne. He also got Rajiv killed. I survived once, but he will finally get me killed. He also said he will get Gamini Desanaike killed. Gamini Desanaike was also among the most prominent politicians in Sri Lanka then, seen to be a rival of everybody's because there were 2 or 3 people. Also there was Ranil Wickremesinghe, who later became Prime Minister. But Gamini Desanaike, he said he will get killed, and then he said Premadasa himself will get killed. And then he said to me, these are published accounts, he said, and you go away, my young friend, you know too much and you are asking too many dangerous questions, otherwise you may also end up that way. And I thought, he's just lost it. He's just gone through such trauma, and he was a very vain man. How vain, I will tell you. When I met him the first time in 1985, he was very friendly with me because I had committed the crime on the Indian side, but I was also greatly lionized on the Sri Lankan side because early in 1984, I had done a story from our Tamil Nadu saying or showing how so many training camps were being run for Tamil separatists and guerrillas. We never used to call them terrorists until then, in our own Tamil Nadu. And that story was quite controversial. I am sharing that link also with you. And that story led to Mrs. Indira Gandhi describing India Today magazine as an anti-national magazine for the second time. The first time she had done so was just a year earlier. That's when we had carried pictures of the Delhi massacre in the magazine. So this story had again led to trouble, but because it embarrassed government of India at that point that they were helping, that RAW and Indian Army were helping Tamil Tigers, it pleased the Sri Lankans a great deal. So when I first went to Sri Lanka, I was lionized and greeted. So when I met him first and I wrote stories about him, interviewed him and published his picture, I got a letter from him in hard copy. And that letter said that, you came and talked with me and you've written stories on Sri Lanka earlier, but I must complain that any time you write about me, you use a particularly unflattering picture of mine. Now that's not a kind of letter I have received from any public figure anywhere. So that was the kind of man he was. Then what he did was, he gave me a bunch of documents. And he said that you can use these documents on a non-attributable basis, but these are official documents, these are files. In fact, he gave me a couple of thin files. He said you can take these because these are photocopied files. And these documents, he said, showed how Premadasa was supplying armaments to LTTE while IPKF was fighting the LTTE in Sri Lanka on behalf of the Sri Lankan government. And irony of ironies, he pointed out to me, these weapons were being supplied to LTTE by Premadasa in Tata trucks gifted to Sri Lankan army by government of India. Now, you might think that maybe he was exaggerating, and I would have also thought, although I reported it then as it was because I had some documents on a non-attributable basis, but later, and this was among the last major things I did at India Today before leaving in 95. In 1995, I had a long interview with Chandrika Kumaratunge when she was the president of Sri Lanka, and that interview was run as the cover story of India Today. Then, please see that in that she said clearly that Prabhakaran and LTTE were responsible for killing Rajiv Gandhi. In that interview, she also explained their motives and the reason they had done it, and she said that's because Rajiv had been tough on him and he was afraid that Rajiv was coming to power again. So in the middle of that election campaign, because it was a 2-phase election campaign, the first phase was first phase had ended, second phase was sort of picking up, and he was afraid the information he might have got or the sense he might have got was that Rajiv was winning and he will come back to power, and he was afraid that he will be again targeted by the Indian army and Indian government. So that was the reason, that was the motive. But she also mentioned, she also confirmed that Premadasa was helping, was giving aid to LTTE while IPKF was there. In fact, the exact figure she used was that 200 billion rupees, Sri Lankan rupees, from one of the secret contingency funds in Sri Lankan federal government had been transferred to LTTE by Premadasa. So these are stories that got confirmed in people's lifetimes, got published, got recorded. Then as a parting quote, something that he said I could quote, Lalith gave me a line which got published. He said, quote unquote, when we get angry, we may slap a person. When LTT gets angry, they will simply kill him. So take no chances. Now see what happened to all the prophecies he had made. Number one, 2 years later, in April 1993, he had said that Premadasa, in his case, tried to kill me. First time I survived, but eventually he will succeed. So April 1993, a gunman killed Lalith Athulathmudali. As this happened, Premadasa's government said this is LTTE, usual suspect. They caught a guy who they said was the LTTE gunman, dead. They even found dead with a cyanide capsule in his mouth, and they thought that story will die, but the story didn't die. There was a commission of inquiry that blamed Premadasa and a bunch of hired guns. Those hired guns, 3 of them within days ended up dead, mysteriously but predictably. So nobody could blame Premadasa. It just so happened that Lalith's other prophecy that Premadasa eventually will get killed also came true. Within 8 days of his assassination, Premadasa himself was assassinated. And how did he get assassinated? He got assassinated also by a human bomb. Like LTTE assassinates more people, friend or foe. Rajiv had been their friend, but because Rajiv tried to make peace, they bumped him off. Similarly, Premadasa had been their friend and also their partner, also complicit with them in their fight against Rajiv Gandhi and government of India, and yet they had Premadasa bumped off. He was killed by a young underage Tamil mature, not even 18 yet. And I will not comment on anybody's sexuality, but Premadasa had taken particular liking to him. Maybe he was very good, he was a very good adept masher, and he would carry him, take with him wherever he went. So on one of those days, this guy, obviously an LTTE cadre, a young LTTE cadre, LTTE employed children all the time, he came with a bomb belt. So LTTE killed Premadasa as they usually kill all their friends and foe, as I said. So he came and gave one final hug to Premadasa and blew himself up and Premadasa. So Premadasa was also gone. The only place where he got the timing wrong was Gamini Disanaike. Gamini Disanaike was also assassinated, but only a year after Premadasa's death. So he was also shot and bombed. So that is the kind of diabolical network that India was dealing with at that point. And I again traveled in 1989, after 1987, during the fighting to Jaffna. I again traveled there in 1989 to see how the fight was going, and that is when Lieutenant General A.S. Kalkat was heading IPKF, and he's the one who turned the tide militarily there, and he gave me the gift of his hospitality, because that's the only way one could travel. Gift of his hospitality means helicopter rides between his 54th, 57th and 36th Division headquarters. Indian Army had 3 divisions then. So one at Jaffna, one at Batticaloa, one at Trincomalee. So I found at that time in all his ops room, all his messes, the common talk and whispers were that not just Premadasa's government was caught up with LTTE, but also that RAW was playing a funny game, because RAW for some reason did not want Prabhakaran captured or killed, because RAW probably saw him as their leverage against the Sri Lankan government. And there was one particular incident where General Kalkat remembered that he had Prabhakaran cornered in the Kilinochi forest area, but it seems as if RAW tipped him off and Raw also put the IPKF on the wrong path, so the Indian Army felt at that point to save him. In fact, some of that also features in Shujit Sarkar's movie. Another thing that features in the movie and which also tells you the character of the LTTE. Now, LTTE had a kind of number 2 called Mahatya. In fact, his full name was Gopalaswamy Mahendra Raja Mahatya. Now, if you see the film, in film there is a character called Malaya, who is similar to Mahatya, who with his cadres is trying to rebel or trying to take over or trying to challenge Prabhakaran, and is then assassinated, put to a firing squad along with his followers. Now, in real life, this was a man called Gopalaswamy Mahendra Raja, who was assassinated, put to a firing squad along with 257 of his follower soldiers. This happened on 28th of December 1994. Now, it so happens that, say, in the film, the sequence says that he was betrayed by the Indian Raw resident or senior Indian Raw officer who was dealing with him. Whereas the story seems to be in reality that, unlike Malaya in the film, Mahatya in real life was betrayed by Premadasa, who let Prabhakaran know about his meetings with the Raw resident or the Raw station head or the senior Raw officer handling IPKF in the Sri Lanka situation. In fact, the story is very murky that senior Raw officer himself got into trouble. He got arrested, he got fired, he got arrested, he spent a year in jail for becoming a double agent. So it seems that initially the CIA got him compromised by getting him free cartridges for his daughter, who was a very good, very talented shooter, and later used a Pan Am stewardess to lay a honey trap, as it's called. Unfortunately, some of that you see in the movie also in a different context. He was arrested, he was in Tihar jail. Then mysteriously somehow, when VP Singh's dodgy government came to power, where DMK was part of the government, he was released, and we believe that he's lived peacefully in Chennai since. This is not an aside. I'm just telling you all this so that you understand what an evil web of all this was.